I'm Talia Morgan, 34 years old, and 5 years ago, my boss looked me in the eye and said, "You're just not leadership material, Talia. You'll never understand real business." Yesterday, I walked into that same office as the new CEO after acquiring his failing company for $18.6 million. The look on his face when I repeated those exact words back to him, priceless. But let me back up, because the woman he fired that day, the single mother barely keeping her head above water, she had no idea that rejection would become the catalyst for building something he could never imagine, something that would eventually buy him out. Before I tell you how I went from unemployed and terrified to acquiring the company that destroyed me, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been told you weren't good enough, only to prove everyone spectacularly wrong. Trust me, this story is just getting started. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Cleveland, the youngest of 3 kids. My father was a machinist at a local factory, and my mother cleaned houses to supplement our income. Money was always tight, but my parents had a fierce belief in education as the path to something better. "You're going to college, Talia," my mother would say while scrubbing someone else's kitchen floor. "You're going to have options we never had." I took that seriously. Scholarships and student loans got me through Ohio State with a degree in business analytics. I wasn't the most social student. I was too busy working 2 part-time jobs and maintaining the GPA I needed to keep my scholarship. While other students partied on weekends, I was analyzing datasets and teaching myself advanced Excel functions in the library. During my senior year, I met Marcus at a coffee shop near campus. He was charming, ambitious, and pursued me with an intensity that felt like love. We married 6 months after graduation, both of us young and naive about what building a life together actually required. The cracks appeared almost immediately. Marcus's ambition was really just talk, grand plans that never materialized, business ideas that never launched, promises that evaporated when actual work was required. I landed a job as a junior analyst at Harrison Consulting Group in Chicago, and we moved for my career, which Marcus quietly resented. When I got pregnant with Maya 3 years into our marriage, Marcus's true character emerged. The night I told him, his response wasn't joy or excitement, it was anger. "How could you let this happen?" he demanded, as if I had conceived alone. "We can't afford a kid right now." What he meant was that he didn't want the responsibility. Throughout my pregnancy, while I worked long hours and dealt with morning sickness, Marcus spent his evenings networking at bars and coming home smelling like alcohol and perfume I didn't wear. Maya was born on a Tuesday morning in February, tiny and perfect and utterly dependent. I held her in the hospital room, looking at her scrunched face, and felt love so fierce it was almost painful. I also felt terrified of the responsibility, of the financial pressure, of raising this human while my marriage crumbled around me. Marcus left when Maya was 4 months old. No dramatic confrontation, no argument. I came home from work one evening to find a note on the kitchen counter. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." Half our meager savings were gone, along with his clothes and his computer. Just like that, I was a single mother with a 4-month-old, a demanding job, and a 1-bedroom apartment I could barely afford. The next few years were a blur of exhaustion and constant calculation. Daycare cost almost as much as I made, but I needed it to work. I needed to work to pay for daycare. The math barely added up, even with careful budgeting. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, an elderly widow who lived across the hall, she watched Maya some evenings when I had to work late, refusing payment but accepting the occasional home-cooked meal or help with her grocery shopping. Without her, I don't know how I would have survived those early years. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Maya would wake up at 2 a.m. and I would hold her, trying to soothe her back to sleep while mentally reviewing the presentation I had to give at 9 a.m. My eyes burned constantly from staring at screens and functioning on 4 hours of sleep. Despite everything, I was good at my job, really good. I had an instinct for seeing patterns in data that others missed, for identifying opportunities and risks before they became obvious. My analyses consistently proved accurate. My recommendations generally led to positive outcomes for clients, and my work ethic was unquestionable. But being good at the work wasn't enough. Corporate advancement required playing political games I didn't have time for. While other analysts schmoozed at happy hours and golf outings, I was picking Maya up from daycare and helping her with alphabet blocks. While others built relationships with senior partners over weekend retreats, I was doing laundry and meal prepping for the week ahead. Still, I kept hoping that merit would matter, that if I just worked hard enough, produced excellent enough results, someone would notice and give me the opportunity I'd earned. I was wrong. Harrison Consulting Group occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Chicago. The firm specialized in operational efficiency consulting for mid-sized companies, helping them streamline processes, cut costs, and improve profitability. When I started there 7 years ago as a junior analyst, the company had about 60 employees and a solid regional reputation. By the time my story really begins, they'd grown to nearly 200 people and were pursuing national expansion. The CEO was Richard Harrison, third-generation wealth whose grandfather had founded the company in the 1960s. Richard was everything you'd expect from someone who'd never had to struggle. Confident to the point of arrogance, dismissive of anyone who hadn't gone to an Ivy League school, and utterly convinced that his success was due to his own brilliance rather than inherited advantages. He was in his late 40s, always impeccably dressed in custom suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His corner office had floor-to-ceiling windows with leather furniture that looked like it belonged in a gentleman's club, and walls covered with his Harvard Business School diploma and photos of himself with various politicians and executives. Richard had a way of making you feel small with just a look. His favorite management technique was public criticism, calling out mistakes in front of the entire team, often embellishing or exaggerating the error for dramatic effect. He seemed to enjoy watching people squirm. My direct supervisor was Jennifer Morrison, a senior analyst who'd been at the firm for 12 years. Jennifer was smart, but had long ago learned that survival meant never challenging Richard, never proposing anything too innovative, and always making him feel like the genius in the room. "Just keep your head down and do good work," she advised me early on. Richard doesn't like people who try to outshine him. That should have been my warning. The culture at Harrison Consulting was intensely competitive. Analysts were pitted against each other for assignments, promotions, and Richard's approval. There was a boys' club mentality among the senior staff, former fraternity brothers and golf buddies who'd known each other for decades and protected their territory fiercely. As one of the few women in analyst roles, and certainly the only single mother, I was already an outsider. I heard the whispers when I left at 5:30 to pick up Maya from daycare instead of staying until 8 p.m. for pointless meetings. I saw the eye rolls when I declined happy hour invitations because I couldn't afford both a babysitter and drinks. "Mommy track," one of the male senior analysts had said about me once, not realizing I was in the break room around the corner. "She's competent, but not serious about her career. You can tell." What they couldn't tell was that I was working harder than any of them. I just had to be more efficient with my time because I had a 3-year-old depending on me. Everything changed, or rather, everything collapsed, because of the Riverside Portfolio Project. Riverside Manufacturing was a potential client, a family-owned industrial equipment manufacturer that had been struggling with declining market share and rising operating costs. They were considering hiring a consulting firm to help them restructure, and Harrison Consulting was one of 3 firms pitching for the contract. The project was worth approximately $850,000 over 18 months, a significant client that could lead to additional work and referrals. Richard assigned it to the senior team, but asked all analysts to submit preliminary assessment memos. I spent 2 weeks on my analysis, working late into the night after Maya was asleep, reviewing Riverside's public financial data,
industry trends, and competitive positioning. What I discovered was that their problem wasn't primarily operational efficiency, it was strategic positioning and outdated technology infrastructure. My memo outlined a three-phase approach. Phase 1, immediate operational improvements to reduce waste and improve cash flow, 6 months. Phase 2, technology infrastructure upgrade to modern inventory management and customer relationship systems, 6 to 9 months. Phase 3, strategic repositioning to focus on their highest margin product lines while divesting or partnering out their commodity products, ongoing. I included specific recommendations, data to support each phase, projected ROI calculations, and a realistic timeline. I knew it was good work, maybe the best analysis I'd ever produced. The morning I submitted it, Jennifer called me into her office. "This is impressive, Talia. Really solid thinking. Though I'm not sure Richard will."
I thought that would be the end of it. I'd keep my head down, do my work, and start quietly looking for opportunities elsewhere. But Richard Harrison wasn't done with me yet. 2 weeks after the Riverside incident, I was called into Jennifer's office. Her expression was grim. "Talia, I need you to understand this isn't personal," she began, which is how I knew it was about to be very personal. "What's going on?" She slid a folder across her desk. "The firm is implementing some restructuring. We're eliminating several positions, and unfortunately, yours is one of them." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "You're firing me?" "Laying you off. It's a business decision based on changing needs and budget constraints." "This is because of the email," I said flatly. "It's because we're restructuring." "Jennifer, don't insult my intelligence. I've had perfect performance reviews for 7 years. My client work has directly contributed to at least 12 successful engagements. This is retaliation for asking for credit for my work." She looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I fought for you. I want you to know that. But Richard felt that your recent behavior demonstrated a lack of team orientation that wasn't a good cultural fit." "Cultural fit," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" "You'll receive 2 weeks severance and continuation of benefits for 30 days. Your access will be terminated today." "I'm sorry, Talia, I really am." I walked back to my desk in a daze. A security guard was already there with a box, waiting to escort me out. The ultimate humiliation. Being walked out like a criminal while my colleagues watched. I packed my personal items in silence. A photo of Maya, my favorite mug, a small plant that had somehow survived on my desk despite my irregular watering schedule. 7 years condensed into a cardboard box. "I'll need your badge and laptop," the security guard said, not unkindly. I handed them over, then walked through the office one final time. Some people looked away, embarrassed. Others stared openly, clearly having heard the news. I caught Richard watching from his office, his expression satisfied. In that moment, I understood something fundamental. To him, I wasn't even a real person. I was an inconvenient variable that had dared to challenge his narrative, and he'd eliminated the variable without a second thought. The elevator ride down felt endless. The security guard stood beside me, uncomfortable with the situation, but professional. When we reached the lobby, he paused. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I've seen a lot of people walked out of this building. Most of them deserved it. I don't think you did." "Thank you," I managed to say. Then I was outside on the street, holding a box of my belongings, unemployed for the first time since college. I sat in my car in the parking garage for nearly an hour, trying to process what had just happened. Then I called Mrs. Chen to ask if she could keep Maya a little longer, and I drove. No destination in mind, just driving through Chicago, past buildings where people had jobs and purpose, and futures that weren't suddenly collapsing. I ended up at a park near the lake, sitting on a bench, watching families and joggers, and people whose lives hadn't just imploded. My phone buzzed with texts from former colleagues. "I can't believe they let you go. That's so unfair. Let me know if I can be a reference."
Nice sentiments, but none of them offered anything practical. None of them said, "I'll talk to my contacts," or "We should grab coffee to discuss opportunities." They were just sending their sympathies to someone who had been officially labeled as not good enough. I had 2 weeks of severance. Rent was $1,850. Daycare was $1,400. Groceries, utilities, car insurance, Maya's health insurance that I'd have to continue paying out of pocket, it all added up to more than I had. The logical thing would have been to panic, to start desperately applying to every job posting, accepting that I'd probably have to take a step backward in my career, maybe even leave Chicago. But sitting on that bench, watching the sunset over Lake Michigan, I felt something different than panic. I felt angry. Not the hot, explosive kind of anger, but something cold and clear and sustaining. Richard Harrison looked at 7 years of excellent work and decided it was worthless because I dared to ask for credit for my work. He threw away my career like it was nothing, knowing I had a daughter depending on me, and he hadn't lost a moment's sleep over it. He told me I wasn't leadership material, that I'd never understand real business. Fine. I'd prove him wrong. Not for him, I'd never give him the satisfaction of knowing he'd motivated me. But for myself, for Maya, for every woman who'd been dismissed and underestimated and told her work didn't matter. I didn't know how yet, but I'd figure it out. I always did. The first few weeks of unemployment were terrifying. I filed for unemployment benefits, which would provide some income, but nowhere near enough to cover my expenses. I applied to dozens of positions, but the consulting industry is small, and word travels fast. Harrison Consulting had let me go, and potential employers could read between the lines. "We've decided to move forward with other candidates. Your qualifications are impressive, but we're looking for someone with a slightly different background. We'll keep your resume on file." Rejection after rejection after rejection. Meanwhile, my savings dwindled at an alarming rate. I stopped buying coffee. I meal prepped religiously to stretch my grocery budget. I canceled my gym membership and streaming services. Every expense was scrutinized, and most were cut. Maya was 3.5, old enough to sense something was wrong, but too young to understand what. She asked why we weren't going to the Children's Museum anymore on Saturdays. I told her we were saving up for something special. "Is it a present?" she asked, her eyes lighting up. "Something like that," I said, hugging her tight. Mrs. Chen noticed I was struggling and began accidentally making too much food and bringing it over. She'd say, "I can never judge portions correctly. It will just go bad if someone doesn't eat it." She refused to let me pay her for watching Maya during interviews, waving away my attempts to compensate her. "You help me with grocery shopping and fixing my computer. We help each other. That's what neighbors do." That kindness meant more than she could know. 6 weeks after being fired, I received a call from an unknown number. "Talia Morgan, this is David Chen from Catalyst Consulting Partners." My heart jumped. I'd applied to Catalyst 3 weeks ago, but hadn't heard anything back. Catalyst was a small firm, maybe 20 people, specializing in operational strategy for manufacturing companies. Not prestigious, not high-paying, but legitimate work. "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time," David continued. "I wanted to reach out about the senior analyst position you applied for." "No, not at all. Thank you for calling. I've been reviewing your background, and honestly, your experience at Harrison Consulting is impressive. But I have to ask, what prompted your departure? Your resume says you left in April, but you'd been there 7 years. That's a long tenure to end suddenly." Here was the moment where I could tell the truth, that I'd been fired for asking for credit for my work, that I'd been told I wasn't leadership material, that Richard Harrison had retaliated against me for one email. But I'd learned enough about how the world worked to know that wouldn't help me. I said Harrison was going through some restructuring. My position was eliminated as part of budget adjustments. The timing wasn't ideal, but these things happen. A pause on the other end. I'm going to be direct with you, Talia. I know Richard Harrison. We were at Booth School of Business together, though we weren't close. I've heard through the grapevine that you were let go, and I've heard some of the reasoning he gave. I see. Which is why I'm calling, because the Richard Harrison I knew in business school was an arrogant ass who took credit for group projects he barely contributed to, and I doubt he's changed much. So I'm less interested in his version of events and more interested in yours. What really happened? I took a breath and made a split-second decision. The truth couldn't hurt me more than I was already hurt. I told him everything. The Riverside project, my analysis, the pitch using my work without credit, the email, Richard's response, the firing 2 weeks later. When I finished, there was a long silence. That sounds exactly like Richard, David finally said. I'm sorry you went through that. No one should have their work stolen and then be punished for objecting. Thank you for saying that. I'd like you to come in for an interview. I can't promise anything, we're a small firm with limited positions, but I think you might be exactly what we're looking for. Are you available this Wednesday? I was available every day for the foreseeable future, but I didn't say that. Wednesday works perfectly. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, hope and anxiety warring in my chest. This could be nothing. One interview didn't mean a job offer, but it was the first genuinely promising conversation I'd had in weeks. I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes of hope before returning to the practical task of stretching my remaining savings for another week. Catalyst Consulting Partner.
Finding the right client for the pilot took 3 months. We needed a company that was willing to try something unconventional, had genuine commitment from leadership, and faced challenges complex enough to demonstrate the model's value, but not so severe that failure would destroy the company. We found them in Midwest Metal Fabrication, a family-owned manufacturer in Wisconsin with 250 employees and declining profitability. The CEO, Tom Brennan, was third-generation ownership, smart, humble, and genuinely concerned about his employees' futures. Our traditional approach would be a 6-month operational assessment with recommendations. We'd charge $400,000, deliver a detailed report, and leave. Some of our recommendations would probably get implemented, many wouldn't, and within a year you'd likely be dealing with similar problems. Tom nodded. He'd worked with consultants before. What we're proposing is different. We'd embed a small team in your operation for 18 months. We'd do the same diagnostic work, but then we'd work side by side with your people to implement changes and train them to sustain improvements after we leave. We'd charge based on the actual results we achieve. If we don't improve your profitability, you don't pay the full fee. What's the catch? Tom asked. The catch is that it requires real commitment from you. We need access to your people, honest data, and willingness to make hard decisions. We need you to invest in training your team. This only works if you're a genuine partner, not just buying a report to put on a shelf. Tom studied the proposal for a long moment. My grandfather started this company with 3 employees in a garage. My father grew it to what it is today. I don't want to be the generation that loses it. If you're willing to bet on us, I'm willing to bet on you. We signed the contract in June. By July, I had moved temporarily to Wisconsin, leaving Maya with Mrs. Chen during the week and driving home on weekends. It was brutal. The guilt of being away from my daughter, the exhaustion of 14-hour days, the pressure of knowing the entire pilot depended on this working. But the work itself was exhilarating. We identified problems that traditional consulting would have missed, not because they were hidden, but because they were visible only to people actually doing the work. Machine operators knew which equipment was unreliable. Floor supervisors understood which processes created bottlenecks. The finance team had insights about customer profitability that never made it to senior leadership. We created what we called improvement teams, cross-functional groups that owned specific problems and were trained in analytical tools to solve them. Not top-down directives, but bottom-up solutions developed by the people closest to the work. The first few months were rocky. Some employees were skeptical of more consultants telling us what we already know.
Some managers felt threatened by the idea of workers making decisions. There were setbacks, failed experiments, and moments where I questioned whether this model could actually work. But slowly, things started to change. The improvement teams began generating real results. Production efficiency increased by 8%. Defect rates dropped by 12%. The company landed 2 new major contracts because they could now deliver quality faster than competitors. More importantly, the culture shifted. Employees felt heard and valued. They took ownership of improvements because they had created them. This wasn't a consultant's report being imposed from above. It was their company getting better because of their ideas and efforts. After 18 months, we presented the final results to Tom and his leadership team. Profitability had increased by 22%, customer satisfaction scores were at a 5-year high, employee turnover had decreased by 35%. "This is remarkable," Tom said, studying the data. "But the real question is, can we sustain it after you leave?" "Yes," I said with confidence, "because you didn't just implement our recommendations, you built the capability to keep improving. The teams we trained are still here. The processes we embedded are now part of how you operate. We didn't fix your company. We helped you learn how to fix yourselves." Midwest Metal Fabrication became our showcase client. When we formally launched what we called the Catalyst Implementation Partnership Model, Tom agreed to be a reference and even spoke at our launch event. "Traditional consultants treat symptoms," he told a room full of potential clients. "Catalyst taught us how to cure diseases. They didn't just make us better, they made us capable of staying better." The response was overwhelming. Within 3 months, we had 5 new clients signed on for implementation partnership engagements. Within 6 months, we had a waiting list. The firm that had been 23 people when I joined was now nearly 70 people, with offices in Chicago, Milwaukee, and a new location in Indianapolis. Revenue had tripled. And I was at the center of it, not as someone executing someone else's vision, but as the architect of a model that was transforming how we worked. Success breeds visibility. As the implementation partnership model proved itself, industry publications started paying attention. I was interviewed for Manufacturing Today magazine, featured in a case study in the Harvard Business Review, and invited to speak at the National Manufacturing Conference. The irony of standing on a stage in front of 500 manufacturing executives sharing insights on operational strategy was not lost on me. 4 years ago, Richard Harrison told me I'd never understand real business. Now, I was being paid to teach it. After one conference presentation, a woman approached me. Late 50s, expensive suit, the bearing of someone used to being important. "That was an excellent talk," she said. "I'm Margaret Chen, managing partner at Silverton Capital. We're a private equity firm focused on manufacturing roll-ups. Your implementation partnership model is exactly what our portfolio companies need." We talked for 20 minutes about potential collaboration. Silverton Capital owned 17 manufacturing companies and was actively acquiring more. They needed operational improvement capabilities across their portfolio, but couldn't afford to hire separate consulting firms for each company. "What if we structured a retainer relationship?" Margaret proposed. "You'd have first right to work with any Silverton portfolio company that needs operational improvement. We'd guarantee minimum annual revenue. You'd give us preferred pricing and priority access." This was exactly the kind of partnership that could take Catalyst to the next level. Steady revenue, diverse clients, growth potential. I'd need to discuss this with our partners, but yes, I'm very interested. That conversation led to a $4.5 million annual retainer agreement with Silverton Capital, more revenue than Catalyst had generated in total 3 years earlier. At the partner meeting where we finalized the agreement, David looked at me with something like wonder. "Do you understand what you've built here, Talia? You haven't just created a new service model, you've created a competitive advantage that's nearly impossible for larger firms to replicate. They're too bureaucratic, too tied to traditional billing models. But we're small enough to be agile, and you've given us a way to deliver results they can't match." The recognition felt good, but what felt better was the work itself. Every client engagement validated that this approach worked. Every trained improvement team that continued generating results after we left proved the model was sustainable. I was building something real, something valuable, something that proved Richard Harrison's assessment of me had been spectacularly wrong. But he still didn't know it. And some part of me, a part I wasn't entirely proud of, wanted him to know, wanted him to see that the analyst he'd dismissed had built something he couldn't have imagined. I didn't dwell on it. I was too busy with meaningful work. But late at night, sometimes I'd think about Harrison Consulting and wonder how they were doing. I'd check their website occasionally. They were still in business, still operating out of that glass tower, still claiming to be industry leaders in operational consulting. But if I looked closely, I could see signs of stagnation. The leadership team photos were the same faces from years ago, just older. The client testimonials on their website were dated. Their thought leadership section hadn't been updated in months. They were maintaining, not growing. They were aging, not evolving. And I felt a small, dark satisfaction at that. By my 4th year at Catalyst, we faced a new challenge. We'd grown faster than our ability to manage growth effectively. We had nearly 80 employees, annual revenue approaching $30 million, and more opportunities than we could handle. David called a partners meeting to discuss our options. "We're at a crossroads," he said. "We can try to keep managing this growth organically, which risks quality degradation and burnout. We can deliberately slow our growth, which means turning away good clients and opportunities. Or we can bring in professional management and operational infrastructure to support the next phase of growth." "You mean bring in someone above us?" Marcus asked, clearly uncomfortable with the idea. "Not above us, but alongside us. Someone who can handle the operational side while we focus on client work and strategy. We're all good consultants, but running a rapidly growing firm requires different skills." The conversation that followed was difficult. The founding partners had built Catalyst from nothing. The idea of bringing in outside management felt like admitting they couldn't handle what they'd created. But as we discussed the specifics of what was breaking, delayed invoicing, inconsistent quality control, strained partner relationships, overworked staff, the need became undeniable. "If we're going to do this," Jennifer said, "we need someone who understands our culture and values, not some corporate operator who's going to MBA-ify everything we've built." David turned to me. "Talia, you've been quiet." "I have been quiet, because an idea was forming, one so audacious."
The acquisition closed 60 days later, exactly as planned. The legal team finalized the paperwork, the money changed hands, and Harrison Consulting officially became a subsidiary of Catalyst Partners. Our communications team scheduled a press conference to announce the acquisition and outline our vision for the combined entity. Industry publications were interested. 2 established consulting firms merging was news, especially given Harrison's struggles and Catalyst's growth trajectory. What they didn't know yet was who would be walking through the doors of Harrison Consulting's office as the new CEO. The morning of the press conference, I stood in my closet at home, looking at my clothes and thinking about the person I'd been 4 years ago when I was walked out of this same building with my belongings in a cardboard box. That woman had been terrified, humiliated, and certain her career was over. The woman I was now, she was about to walk back into that building with authority that couldn't be taken away. "You look nervous," Maya observed from my doorway. She was 8 now, perceptive and already showing signs of the fierce intelligence that would serve her well. "I am nervous," I admitted, "but not scared. There is a difference." "What's the difference?" "Nervous means you care about doing something well. Scared means you think you can't do it. I know I can do this." She smiled. "Because you're leadership material." I laughed, remembering telling her that phrase years ago. "Exactly." The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. in Harrison Consulting's main conference room, the same room where I'd been dressed down by Richard 4 years earlier for daring to ask for credit for my work. I arrived at 9:30. Several journalists were already setting up, along with cameras from local business news.
Marcus, David, and Jennifer were there as representatives from Catalyst's leadership team. And in the back corner, looking like he'd been forced to attend his own funeral, was Richard Harrison. Our eyes met across the room. His expression was carefully blank, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the armrests of his chair just a little too tightly. He knew what was coming. The board had informed him that I would be announced as CEO of the combined entity. But knowing something intellectually and watching it happen in front of industry press were different experiences. At exactly 10 o'clock, I walked to the podium. The room quieted. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I'm Talia Morgan, and as of today, I'm the CEO of Catalyst Partners, which now includes Harrison Consulting as a subsidiary. I paused, letting that sink in for the journalists who were familiar with both companies. Some of you may know that I worked at Harrison Consulting for 7 years before joining Catalyst 4 years ago. This acquisition represents a full circle moment, returning to a company that shaped my early career, but returning with the capabilities and vision to help it become what it could have been all along. I walked them through our integration plan, our commitment to retaining employees, our vision for combining Harrison's brand recognition with Catalyst's operational excellence. Professional, strategic, forward-looking. But I couldn't resist one personal moment. When I left Harrison Consulting 4 years ago, someone told me I wasn't leadership material, that I'd never understand real business. I'd like to thank that person for the motivation. Being underestimated is a powerful fuel for success. Several journalists smiled, clearly understanding the subtext. I saw Richard shift uncomfortably in his seat. The Q&A session that followed was surprisingly straightforward. Journalists asked about integration challenges, client retention strategies, and financial projections. No one asked directly about the personal history, though several questions danced around it. Finally, one brave journalist from Chicago business raised her hand. Miss Morgan, Richard Harrison is in the room. Would you like to address him directly about this acquisition? I looked at Richard. He stared back, his expression unreadable. I'd simply say that I hope we can work together to preserve what's valuable about Harrison Consulting while building something better. This isn't about the past, it's about the future. Richard stood. For a moment, I thought he might say something dramatic, make a scene, give the journalists the conflict they were hoping for. Instead, he just said, "Congratulations, Miss Morgan," in a tone that made it clear he meant anything but. Then he walked out of the press conference. It was a small moment, easily missed by those who didn't know the full history, but for me, it was everything. Richard Harrison, the man who had wielded power over my career, who dismissed my capabilities and fired me for daring to challenge him, had just been forced to congratulate me on acquiring his family company. He had no power over me anymore. The realization hit me like a wave. Not triumph exactly, more like completion. The circle had closed. The person who told me I wasn't good enough had been proven definitively wrong, and he knew it. After the press conference ended and the journalists filtered out, Marcus pulled me aside. That was perfectly handled. Professional, gracious, and you got your point across without being petty. I had a good teacher, I said, nodding toward David, who was talking with Jennifer across the room. What's next? Now comes the hard part. Actually integrating two companies with different cultures, retaining the best people from both sides, and proving that this acquisition wasn't just about ego. Can we do it? I smiled. We can do it. Watch. The first 90 days after the acquisition were the most challenging of my professional life. Merging two consulting firms meant combining not just operations and clients, but cultures, egos, and deeply held beliefs about how work should be done. Harrison employees were wary, worried about layoffs and changes to everything they knew. Catalyst employees were skeptical about whether legacy consultants could adapt to our more collaborative, results-focused model. I spent those first months holding town halls, one-on-one meetings, and countless conversations, reassuring, explaining, and listening. I know this is unsettling, I told a group of anxious Harrison consultants during one town hall. Change always is. But we're not here to destroy what worked about Harrison. We're here to preserve it and add capabilities you've been asking for. What about Richard? Someone asked. Is he coming back? Richard has chosen not to continue with the combined firm, but his legacy, the client relationships, the brand, the standards of excellence, those remain. Slowly, cautiously, the integration progressed. We kept the Harrison Consulting name for their existing clients while gradually introducing Catalyst's implementation partnership model. We retained 87% of Harrison employees, letting go only those who were actively destructive or completely unable to adapt. We invested in training, bringing Harrison consultants through our methodology. Some embraced it immediately. Others took more time. A few quietly left for other firms unable to accept that their old way of working was gone. But gradually, the culture started to shift. Harrison consultants began seeing the value of the implementation partnership model, the deeper client relationships, the more sustainable results, the satisfaction of building capabilities rather than just delivering reports. Client retention exceeded our projections. Of Harrison existing clients, 92% stayed with the combined firm. Several specifically cited their confidence in the new leadership and appreciation for our more hands-on approach. Revenue stabilized, then grew. The combined firm's annual revenue reached $75 million by the end of year one, $95 million by year two. We hit our earnout targets, which meant Harrison's former shareholders received their full $8.6 million. Even Richard, despite his opposition, received his proportional share. I never spoke to him again after the press conference. He took his payout, retired from the consulting industry, and from what I heard through the grapevine, became a business school professor teaching strategy. The irony of him teaching strategy after running his company into the ground wasn't lost on me, but I didn't dwell on it. I was too busy building something better. 3 years after the acquisition, I stood in my office, the same corner office that used to be Richard's, though I'd completely redesigned it, looking out at Lake Michigan and reflecting on how far I'd come. From the single mother, fired and told she wasn't good enough, to the CEO of a firm managing nearly $150 million in annual revenue and employing over 300 people. Maya was 11 now, thriving in middle school and interested in math and science. She'd recently asked me about starting her own business someday, some kind of app she'd imagined that would help kids organize their homework. Can girls be CEOs? She'd asked me. I told her girls can be anything. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Mrs. Chen, who had been there for every milestone, had finally retired from her own job and now volunteered at a community center. I'd set up a small trust fund for her, which she'd initially refused until I explained it wasn't charity.